Hey everybody, we are over here at the Edge 4x4. What's going on today, Chris?
You know, we're doing the Yukon Total Takeover.
Oh, what is that?
Yukon Total Takeover, it's one day a year, okay? It happens to be the 18th of March this time. And what we're doing
today.
Today, it might be today, okay? So, and we're doing a live re-gear, okay, which is fantastic. And it's all Yukon. Everything we're doing today is all Yukon, axle and gear.
Love it. Guys, you know, I run Yukon gears and I run the Yukon rear axles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love them. Fantastic. And who's doing the gearing today?
Jesse's back there working hard. This guy is unbelievable.
Well, we'll go back. We'll talk to Jesse. We'll do some stuff with him. We'll learn something about some diffs, hopefully, and see what it's all about.
Thanks for making it out for this, by the
man.
way. This has been so fun.
Remember, the Edge 4x4, where are you located?
2331 West Hamden. We're right here in Inglewood, Colorado.
The only place that I let touch my Jeep. So keep that in mind. Thanks, Chris.
Heck yeah.
Thanks for putting this on, man. We can't wait to get back there and check out some gears.
Right on. Thanks, Kerry.
We're back here with Jesse while he's working on this rear diff. Anytime people start talking about doing gear changes on Facebook or whatever, there's always going to be someone that says, well, just do it at home. It's not that big of a deal. Why is it a hard job?
You know, it's just, you have to know exactly what you're doing. You know, it's physically wise, it's not hard. But if you don't know what you're doing, what you're looking at, things like that, you go down the road, it'll just grenade.
I mean, when you look at the carrier, there's like 4 bolts.
Right.
You know, you change the gears, there's like 8 bolts, right? I mean, it's
Absolutely, yeah. No, I mean, there's not a lot to it, but what most people don't keep in mind is that it's like, oh man, 4th gear, 1-to-1 ratio, right? I see 3,000 RPM. That's how fast that pinion's spinning. You don't have that set up right, like, that becomes a rocket ship.
so the 2 main things you're looking for are like your gear mesh and backlash, right?
Yeah. So there's pinion preload, just because if it's too loose, it'll start leaking and the bearings will eat itself. If it's too tight, they can't get any oil. Bearings will eat themselves. So you have to kind of set that up to that sweet spot. And then once you get that set up, make sure your backlash is where it's supposed to be. Because if it's too open, too much space between the pinion and the ring gear, it'll eat itself. If it's too tight, same thing. So there's that little bit of slop so that gear oil can get in there, and then finally, once everything's kind of dialed in that way, put a little bit of paint on it, run your pattern, make sure that pattern looks really nice right in the middle, and ship it on down the road.
But it's not just the knowing how to do it. There's some specialized tools.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's specialized bearing pullers that can pull the bearings on and off without actually like destroying the bearing. Because back in the day, it was kind of a one-use thing. You press that bearing on and you got it wrong, you got to go get a new bearing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so they've definitely got some new specialized tools. But I mean, micrometers to measure in the thousandths of an inch, because that's what you're playing with here is just the little tiny shims, and it's like I can move this shim 5 thousandths over, and my pattern's completely different. You know, so using all of those, you know, real precise tools is key to this thing. So, you know, it's like a lot of people go, "Oh, I don't have that." You know, I'm gonna eyeball it. You know, and
We'll throw some paint on it and check it, right?
Right. You know, and it's like, you know, sometimes that works, but more times than not, it doesn't.
I mean, maybe if you're building a beater, you know, but if it's also your daily and you got to rely on that,
Right.
you got to have things right.
Absolutely.
And having the right tools and the know-how, well, that's why I come here to have mine done.
Right.
And when you see it being taken apart, you're like, oh, yeah, that really isn't that difficult. And then you start seeing the different tools being pulled out. You're like, well, I don't have that.
Right.
I don't know what he's doing there.
Right.
And then I see the pattern. I'm like, oh, that looks good.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's the key. And like I said, you know, it's like a lot of people, you know, they opt to not have it professionally installed, you know, and you know, sometimes it gets, you know, it boils down to, hey, I can't afford to have, you know, a set of gears installed. It's too much. I'll just mess around with it myself. It's like 9 times out of 10, those people are into that axle twice as much when it's all said and done, because they've destroyed bearings, so they got to go buy more bearings, or, you know, they messed up the pattern, they went and drove it and it ate itself, so they got to do it again, you know. So, you know, it's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people that are mechanically inclined, you know, but
realizing this probably isn't for me.
Yeah, it's like once you get into it, then that's when most people realize like, oh, I've messed up, you know. And so
And then it's too late.
yeah, well, and more often than not, we get people that come down to the shop that have literally pulled their entire axle out of their car because they tried to gear it. They have no idea what they're doing, and so they bring us the loose axle and they go, I need to get it geared, you know. And you're like, okay, we'll get it back to you.
Now you've got the pinion in, right?
I don't have the pinion in yet, but I just got the.
Oh, you got the.
I got the races in, so next step will be get the pinion in, tighten that down, and then I'll get the carrier in. I'll check my backlash, see where that's at, and then if that backlash is good within spec, then I'll run a pattern.
All right. So we'll check back in. We'll keep an eye on this.
Sounds good, buddy.
So here we have an example of a diff that's broken.
Yep.
And in here we can see some busted teeth.
Yep.
I'm familiar with that situation.
Absolutely.
Now,
Yeah,
what can cause something like this?
When this is what comes out
Oof.
of your gear oil,
That's bad.
That's not good. That's
not bad.
good. So.
What's typically what would cause this?
Typically, what happens is you don't have good enough backlash set up, and so the pinion will start kind of eating into the ring gear. In this instance, it looks more like a tooth from the pinion got shock loaded, so it cracked. Kind of tooth came off, and then got bound up between the ring gear and the pinion so bad that it actually warped this cap and literally blew that bolt in half. So this is one of those cases where it's like, hey, the gears were not happy. They weren't set up right because these were recently done, not here, but you know, kind of a let's do it at home type thing. And driving it along, it grenaded on him bad enough to where he needs a whole new housing now. So,
Now, Jesse did mention shock loading, and this can happen to anybody off-road when your tires start spinning, especially like in the air,
Right.
and then they come down, hit ground, and come to an immediate stop.
Right,
And
exactly.
that puts so much shock on these that's how you can break a gear.
Yep.
And that's what happened to us.
Yeah,
So,
and we see it generally, the shock loading part of it, we see a lot more when the person is trying to do a recovery and they're going in reverse.
Oh.
They shock load the back side of that pinion, which isn't the strong side, and it'll just give it a little bit of a crack, you know, and then as they're driving, it's like that heat cycle and the vibrations and stuff just from normal driving, that tooth will pop off.
Yeah.
And this is the result. So
yeah, if you've never heard that before, that is definitely a thing. You don't do a snatch recovery in reverse. You get yourself turned around or you do a winch recovery.
Exactly.
Going in reverse, not good on your gears.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what can happen.
Yep.
Goodly. Now, of course, since we're here at the Edge on the Yukon Takeover Day, this Jeep is getting Yukon Gears and Axles, or Yukon Gears, right? Are they doing axles too?
Not doing axles today.
Not doing axles today, but they are doing
plans in the future.
the Yukon Gears, and that's the same gears that we run in Optimus. We also have the Yukon rear axle, make a big difference, or the axle shafts, I should say, the chromoly shafts. We love those. Haven't had any problems since we put them in. And the Yukon gears, they really hold up. So he's got some banging and cranking to do over here, and we'll check back in a few minutes. All right, we got some gears going in.
Got some gears going in, so I'll get it all bolted down. Check my backlash. Backlash is good, then we'll run a pattern and see where we're at.
Are these Dana 44s?
They are.
Really?
Yeah, front and rear in the JL Rubicons.
I'm surprised on this Jeep actually.
Right.
But yeah, for one of theirs, I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Now 44s for right now, but knowing them, I'm sure 60s are in the plan at some point.
It stood out that this was a stock axle because we've got the electronic locker connect right here. So definitely shows itself there.
Absolutely.
So when we were talking earlier about some specialized tools, well, this is one of them. What's this one called?
So this one's called a dial indicator. It reads in thousandths of an inch. And what we are checking is the slop between the ring gear tooth and the pinion tooth. So kind of has this cool little dial that just spins around so you can get all of your numbers zeroed out, so you can kind of set it up wherever you want. And then you just basically go back and forth and see what that slop is. So right now, we are running right at 6.
And is that what you were shooting
That's
for?
exactly what I'm shooting for.
Now, if you had to adjust that, what would you have to do?
So if you have to adjust that, so let's say that that came back at like 20 thousandths, like just massively off. So there's a shim underneath this bearing cap and underneath this bearing cap on both sides of the bearings. So if we're 20 thousandths, what that tells me, since my pinion is sitting right here, just on the other side, I need to move that ring gear closer. So pull this whole thing out, measure how thick this is, take 20 thousandths out of that side, put it on this side, move it over, and then put it all back together and kind of see what that did. So that might drop it down to 10 thousandths backlash. And then that's more within that spec where you can run a pattern and kind of see where you're at. So that's kind of how you move that carrier is.
So
Just
sometimes
shift on one side,
it's
add
trial
on
and
the other.
error.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're real versed in gears, I mean, you could run a pattern pretty much at any backlash. I mean, obviously, if it's hundreds of thousandths of inches, like you can't run a pattern there. But if you're close, you can run a pattern and kind of see what it is, and you'll know. Okay, once I tighten up and get my backlash correct, my pattern will move to here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all just kind of how you read the pattern, but a lot of times it is trial and error. They have, at least I should say, the way I set up gears. They do have specialized gears for 44s and other axles where you put a tube in there, do your dial indicator against the pinion, and it'll tell you this is, according to the markings on the pinion, this is the shim that you need. Put that in and you kind of do the same thing, and it works perfect every time. It's just, for me, it's such a time-consuming way. It's faster for me to actually do a couple trial and errors. Do my first initial one with like factory shims, see how it is, and then I adjust from there. But for me, I can do that because I know what the pattern is telling me, and I know where the pattern will move to according to what I'm seeing.
Now, when there's a difference, is that just manufacturing tolerances?
Yeah, so it's like everything is different that we've just done. So we've got new bearings, we've got new gears, everything's different minus the housing and the carrier. So if Yukon's manufacturer, if this ring gear is, a thousandths thicker than a factory one, well, now you got to change your shims. If the bearing that you put on is a couple thousandths, smaller than the factory, you gotta change your shim.
And we're talking some really tight tolerances here.
Absolutely, yeah. So to put it lightly, according to Mopar, for their different factory axles that you can buy with different gear ratios in it, their backlash specs are anywhere from 2 thousandths to 6 thousandths. Depending, and their backlash spec changes depending on what gear it is, which is kind of different than a lot of manufacturers. But the general rule of thumb for these aftermarket gears is anywhere from 6 to 12 thousandths. So, but I mean, if you think about, the thickness of a human hair is like 1 thousandths or 2 thousandths. You know what I mean? So, I mean, we are definitely playing with really, really fine measurements. So, but yeah, you pull everything apart, and it's like half the time I pull out factory lockers and there's no preload on the bearings anymore. Because it's like the Jeep has been beat up off road, the housing's moved a little bit, the bearings have kind of collapsed a little bit. So it's like with those, you're basically starting new. Like, okay, well, I'm gonna eyeball some shims and put them in here and see, and then it's like, okay, that got me close. Now I can really start dialing it in with all the specialized tools.
Yeah. So again, reasons to not do it yourself.
Right.
But we'll watch as he uses the dial. Oh, you're already done with it.
I'm already done with the
He's
dial,
too quick for me.
But
This is now the paint that we talked about earlier.
Yeah. So this is just yellow gear marking compound. I would say it's kind
We
of.
say paint, but it's not paint.
It's it's definitely oil based. I would equate it to like oil based paint. Back in the day, they used to use a chemical called Prussian blue, and it would make an impression, and it was blue. That stuff, you can't ever see a pattern because, like, figure like ring gear's dark black, gray, whatever it is, and it's like those things were. That was hard to do it that way.
So now he's going to turn it so it engages with the pinion.
Yep.
And when he comes back around, we'll be able to see how well the ring and the pinion meshed up.
Yep. So we'll go one way because that got one side of the pinion tooth. And then now we go back the other way and that'll get the other side. So then that'll give us our drive and our coast sides.
So we can already see it as it's coming out.
So we are dead nuts in the middle right there. It's the best way I can describe it is like it's super dark and then fades away.
Mm-hmm.
So what that shows is that pinion tooth is actually contacting and then just nice feather, nice movement out. Whereas sometimes you'll get them all set up and it'll be a very harsh line and there's no fade or there's no feather. And it's like that's the sharp edge of that tooth contacting and
That's just going to grind away.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you're gonna get 100 yards on this thing with full body weight, and every single one of those teeth is gonna have a hash mark in it, and then it'll just wear from there. So what you really want to look for, because there's so many different patterns that are, number one, acceptable, but it also depends on kind of what you're doing the application for. But you really want to look for that feathering. For like race applications or kind of strictly off-road applications, we'll set it up to where that feathering is on the very inside and inside on the drive and the coast, because that is the strongest part of that ring gear. Whereas like, okay, well, these are all set up for, kind of customer convenience and daily driving and comfort. So you want that thing as close to the middle as you possibly can, because that's where it's going to be the quietest. It's kind of the best of both worlds. It's like it'll be the strongest and the quietest. It's like you can set them up differently, but
interesting.
For what we do here, like I said, 99% of the stuff that we do here is daily driven to the trail.
Ours.
We set them up, dead nuts in the middle, right at those factory specs, because then that gives us the most amount of strength and the quietest ride.
The nice balance.
Exactly. So
you definitely don't want it on the outside.
Right. And, it's like sometimes you can run one on the outside, one on the inside, and you're like, okay, well, now I got to change my pinion depth and things like that. And that's where this paint mark really comes in, because, before we did this, like, yep, we checked our backlash. That's good. Our pinion's got some nice preload on it. But if the pattern was really bad, it's like, well, if I would just go, yeah, my backlash is good, and then ship it out the door, it'd be back on Monday.
Now, as you said, this is oil based, so you're not going to clean that off.
Right.
You're just going to seal this up, and as the oil circulates through here, it's actually going to wash that off. So if you ever pull this off, you won't see that.
Exactly.
It's going to be gone.
Yeah, it'll all be gone. It doesn't affect anything with the oil. It's not like it's a contamination or anything like that. Especially whenever we do gears, we always tell people, hey, there's a break-in process, because these gears are actually coated with like zinc and different things like that help match it to the pinion, which gives you the most strength and the quietest ride. So after 500 miles, you can drain this fluid and you look at it and you're like, my word, this looks like it was put in 1973.
I'll vouch for that.
It's horrible, but it's all of that coating coming off in that initial break-in period. We drain that and we put in some nice synthetic afterwards, and then you're good to go beat it up.
So like my break-in, I basically did 50 miles of driving, let it rest for 30 minutes. 50 miles, 30 minutes. 50 miles, 30, until I had 500 miles on it.
Yep.
Bring it in, they drain it, refill it, good to go.
Yep. Yeah, we drain it. We check to make sure that the fluid doesn't look like there's a whole bunch of, chunks in it. I mean,
Chunks would be bad,
it's
especially metal.
It's crazy. A lot of people get wigged out when they do their first gear oil change because there is lots of, I call it glitter in that metal because it's the gears meshing to each other. So, but we check all that, make sure that everything's looking good, kind of go over everything. And it's like, if it's all good, we clean it all out, put in that new fluid, and then you can go, as you said, 97 miles an hour bouncing off the rev limiter, and you don't have an issue. So,
how often should somebody change their diff oil?
That's always the hardest question to answer. So for me personally, I change mine every winter and every summer. It's probably not necessary, but again, this is kind of an all-day process for somebody who knows how to do it. So it's like, I don't want to break it. So
And for someone else, it's expensive.
right. And so the way I look at it, it's like, okay, well, I've got my winter fluid, because I kind of go through my whole Jeep and just kind of winterize it, if you will. So I've got my winter fluid, I put that in and run it throughout the winter. And then at the end of winter, I drain that out and I put my summer fluid in, and I kind of go back and forth like that. My suggestion, honestly, I don't think you necessarily need to do it that often, but it does depend on what you do off-road. So if you have lots of trails like Holy Cross, where there's a fairly deep creek crossing, and you're submerging these axles in water, in theory, yes, they're all sealed up, but, sometimes this little rubber hose right here for the air vent has a little bit of a leak in it. Well, once you start getting water in
Assuming it's there.
right, exactly. Once you start getting water in this thing, it's like if you're running that, you're just going to destroy bearings. They're going to get rust spots and pitted and everything like that. So, I always check my fluid, and then, like I said, I change it twice a year, basically.
Now, my rule of thumb on Optimus has been 20,000 miles, or if the axles were submerged for a period of time.
Yeah.
So if I'm just running through some water real quick, not a big deal.
Right.
But if it got stuck or something and it sat with the axle submerged for 5-10 minutes, as soon as I get home, I'm draining the oil.
Yep.
So
Yeah, no,
is that a good rule of thumb?
I think that's a great rule of thumb. And the nice thing about most of the Jeeps out there, they have fill plugs that you can easily access, and you can pop that fill plug out, and some fluid will drain out. You can kind of see what your fluid looks like.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, like you said, if you're stuck in water or submerged for an extended period of time, when you're done four-wheeling and stuff like that, change that fluid out. It's
Better safe than sorry.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I would rather spend $100 on gear oil than a couple $1,000s on a new diff.
Exactly.
So it's like it may not be necessary for everybody, but for me, it's like I do it twice a year. For you, you do it anytime you're submerged under.
Yeah. And 20,000 miles for us is about a year.
Yeah.
So odds are it happens twice a year.
Right.
Somewhere we're stuck in water behind somebody, or just because it was deep or whatever. So odds are we're changing ours about twice a year.
Yep.
But that 20,000 mark is my max. After that, we just wheel it so hard, it's just best to just drain it and refill it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's not that the oil goes bad in that 20,000, but like you said, better safe than sorry.
Right.
It's like, because the moment that you get relaxed and go, I'll change it next year, it's like that's when something's going to happen.
Right. All right. We got a good pattern on here. What's next?
Next is we'll clean it all up, just because obviously you get a little bit of dirt marks and things like that. So I'll clean it all up, and we'll put the axle shafts in, and we're good to go.
Good job.
We're done.
Right on,
At
Jesse.
least done with the hard part, I should say.
What a great event, man.
Thanks for coming. This was awesome.
Absolutely. Learned a lot of cool stuff from Jesse back there. We talked about damage that can happen on a diff.
Yeah.
And, why you should go to a shop and have it done, which made a lot of sense to me. I mean, now that I've had mine done a few times, but I wouldn't want to do it myself. That specialty and that skill and the tools makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, and guys like Jesse, he does this. He's done 1,000 gear jobs. So it's like those are the guys you really want looking at it and maintaining these things. But yeah, the setup, all that stuff is critical, the break-in. So yeah, again, wealth of information.
Yeah, I mean, I love doing stuff myself. I love working on the ZJ and stuff. But there's those things that someone else should probably do. Like, I stopped doing my own brakes just so I could have someone to sue.
Yeah, right.
You know? And big thanks to Yukon, right?
Yes.
Yukon Gears and Axles for sponsoring the event, putting this on.
absolutely.
And they did this all over the country, right?
They did, yeah. So
Do you know how many shops they were?
I don't know the number, but I will tell you that there were only 2 in Colorado. We were proud to be the one, their largest shop in Colorado.
You're a Yukon master installer.
Absolutely. So it was awesome.
Great.
Worked out great.
Good crowd, good day, beautiful weather.
Yes.
Some great food. Thanks for that.
You're welcome.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it, man.
Be safe out there. We'll see you on the trails.